Señores, hoy tenemos que hablar con claridad, sin filtros. Donald Trump sabe que está perdiendo. Sabe que está más débil que nunca. Está perdiendo mucho apoyo. Hemos visto cómo pierden los tribunales. Hemos visto cómo su agenda se está desmoronando en el Congreso. Cuando alguien como Donald Trump siente que lo están acorralando, recurre a lo único que sabe hacer: amenazar. Está lanzando amenazas contra miembros demócratas en el Congreso, ha lanzado amenazas contra republicanos que no lo siguen o los que no quieren apoyar este presupuesto, que actualmente está en la Cámara de Representantes, y bueno, contra cualquiera que se atreva a contradecirlo, sin importar quién sea. Pero esas amenazas, amigos, le están saliendo caro. Hoy vimos una de las respuestas más fuertes hasta el momento. La congresista Jasmine Crockett decidió hablar públicamente sobre las amenazas de arresto que Donald Trump ha estado promoviendo contra ella y contra otros legisladores demócratas. Sean bienvenidos a Políticamente Desacuerdo. Señores, hoy veremos cómo las amenazas de Donald Trump contra Jasmine Crockett fracasan luego de que ella se presenta públicamente en el Congreso. Así que los invito a que se queden hasta el final de este video porque veremos los detalles más interesantes. Y bueno, señores, sé que algunos no han prestado mucha atención a los últimos sucesos en el Congreso o en la Cámara de Representantes, pero en este momento el proyecto de ley, los recortes que Trump quiere impulsar en la Cámara de Representantes han estado en problemas. Se ha visto atascado esta agenda no solo por demócratas, sino por los propios republicanos. Algunos republicanos que sí lo apoyan y otros que quieren más recortes y entonces deciden no votar. Pero el tema con los demócratas es un poquito más complicado. Con los demócratas lo único que hace Trump es amenazar. Y eso es lo que sucedió con Jasmine Crockett. Escuchemos a la demócrata en el Congreso.
And somehow, during the later hours of last night, we saw that while the mayor had been unlawfully charged, those charges ended up being dropped. The mayor of the largest city in the state of New Jersey was charged with criminal trespass. Now, we have video footage, and I'm not gonna play it, but we have video footage of literally them opening the gate and then asking him to leave, and then he left. Therefore, there is no criminal trespass. But the reason that I bring it up is because this entire situation could have been avoided if people just would know their jobs and actually do their jobs. Because the entire chaos that ensued, it ensued because of the unlawful detainment and arrest of the mayor in the first place. But let me get to my actual remarks. The Republicans have called today's hearing for one purpose: to help an administration that's already rooted in lawlessness and corruption execute their dangerous assault on American democracy. So in today's hearing, you'll hear them admonish their own congressional colleagues and excuse the behavior of the out-of-control, corrupt Trump administration. They're going to try to convince you that they're here to protect law and order and the rule of law. But they won't mention how the Trump administration is openly defying many of the 162 court rulings that have paused his illegal executive orders. They won't talk about how the president has called for the impeachment of judges who rule against him, or how they're allowing ICE agents to raid churches and elementary schools. They won't talk about how they're allowing Trump to purge the Department of Justice of employees who helped investigate the January 6th insurrectionists. They won't talk about how this administration is preparing to give $5 million to the family of Ashley Babbitt, who participated in said insurrection, because they don't actually care about law and order and the rule of law. They're here today for one reason: to forfeit their constitutional oversight responsibilities. But since I decided to bring up January 6th, let me run a tape to remind y'all of the difference of congressional oversight versus criminals.
We're here conducting an oversight visit, which we had the power to do as congressional members.
It's interesting that one set of behavior somehow is going to get a family rich overnight. And the other folk that were there in that video, the members of Congress, well, they're saying arrest them. Let me remind you that those January 6ers have been pardoned. Let me remind you that yet another January 6er was just arrested a few days ago for committing what? Another crime. So if we're going to talk about us keeping our streets safe, let's be real about who's causing crimes, who actually went through what we call due process, because no one denied the January 6th insurrectionists of their due process. They went to court, they either pled guilty or were found guilty, and they were sent to prison, and half of them, actually all of them, if their sentences said so, should still be in prison. Because we as Americans would be safer. We won't get into the fact that another one was already in trouble because they had already killed somebody. But I'll continue on. Right now, our Republican colleagues want to forfeit their constitutional oversight responsibilities. Let's talk about what's actually happening. In March, we learned that the Trump administration was dismantling the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties and terminating staff at the Office of the Citizenship and Immigration Services Ombudsman. And in the Office of Immigration Detention Ombudsman, because they argue, quote, these offices have obstructed immigration enforcement and, quote, undermined DHS's mission. The Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties investigates public complaints about possible violations of civil rights and civil liberties in DHS activities, including immigration enforcement and discrimination. And in the Immigration Detention Ombudsman's it is their primary responsibility to conduct oversight on conditions at immigration detention centers. So why would the Trump administration want to dismantle offices tasked with conducting oversight of immigration enforcement and detention facilities? The simple answer is, without them, there will be no internal oversight offices to assess the legality of the Trump administration's policies on immigration enforcement. So what have the results been? Since Trump took office on January 20th, 9 detainees have died in ICE custody. In fact, in Trump's first month in office, more detainees died in ICE custody than at any time since fiscal year 2020. Congressional Democrats have engaged in oversight activities of immigration facilities across the country, from Florida, where a 44-year-old Haitian woman died in ICE custody, to Newark, New Jersey, where 3 of our Democratic colleagues visited an immigration detention facility to ensure the humane treatment of detainees. This wasn't about going in and breaking nobody out, y'all, especially when there were cameras rolling everywhere. That's not what they were there to do. Now, in a breathtaking act of executive obstruction of congressional oversight and the unprecedented weaponization of the Department of Justice, we have an interim U.S. attorney for New Jersey who for years has argued in court that Donald Trump is above the law. She has announced criminal charges against Congresswoman McIver for, quote, impeding and interfering with law enforcement. However, our power as members of Congress to conduct oversight is found in the Constitution and federal law. In fact, federal law explicitly prohibits DHS from, quote, preventing a member of Congress from entering for the purpose of conducting oversight any facility operated by or for the Department of Homeland Security used to detain or otherwise house aliens, or to make any temporary modification at any such facility that in any way alters what is observed by a visiting member of Congress. It is against the law. Full stop. Separately, the court has consistently held that the speech and debate clause of the Constitution protects individual members from prosecution for legislative acts, including, quote, fact-finding, field investigations, and information gathering. The court has consistently held that the primary purpose of the speech and debate clause is to, quote, prevent intimidation by the executive and before a possibly hostile judiciary. So let's call this for what it is. This administration is criminalizing legislative oversight, and the Republicans on this committee are helping them to do so. Rep. McIver didn't engage in interference. It was ICE that engaged in interference while members of Congress attempted to conduct legitimate oversight of ICE facilities. Everyone, whether you are American or not, should be deeply disturbed and worried about Trump's abuse of power. They're attacking universities for teaching things they don't like. They're attacking law firms for representing clients that they don't like. This hearing and these charges are an attempt at political intimidation. The 3 members in Newark were exercising their constitutional duties to check an out-of-control executive branch. This entire situation happened because of the unjust arrest of Mayor Baraka. And not only were the members invited in and given a tour of the facility, this was after they so-called had broken the law. Now, I don't know about y'all, but where I'm from in Texas, I can tell you that I'm not used to having law enforcement see a crime happen right in front of their faces and then say, never mind, we'll just go about our business. In fact, why don't you go ahead and come on in? Come on in, we gonna do this tour because, oops, we did make a mistake because technically by law, we are supposed to allow you in. And wait a minute, while you're here, do y'all want something to drink? We got refreshments for you as well. And then after you conduct this oversight, and you actually gave a clean bill of health because you were never there to disrupt, you were always there to do your duty. They came out and they said, everything looks good. And then it wasn't at that moment that they decided to arrest members. It wasn't the next day. In fact, even as I sit here today, no member has been arrested. Now you tell me how many times you can see the robber go in the bank, steal the money, and then they say, well, never mind, we'll think about this later. That is what you call politicizing. And that is what we are here to talk about is wrong. But we got a few other issues with ICE right now, so I'm gonna get to them in a second. The DOJ, as I said already, has already dropped the charges against the mayor. Look, they're coming after everyone who uses their constitutional rights and duties to speak truth to power. The press, the courts, and now members of Congress. And to be perfectly honest, I had my team do the research. Under no other president, Democrat or Republican, can we find an incident where they have tried to arrest members of Congress. This is absolutely absurd that they were out there simply doing their duty. We have never seen ICE act in this way. In fact, it's not less oversight that we need right now, it's more.
Y es que, señores, totalmente de acuerdo con Jasmine Crockett. Lo que está haciendo Donald Trump es puro intento de intimidación. Es lo de siempre, quiere sembrar miedo, quiere que nadie pueda atreverse siquiera a fiscalizarlo, que nadie lo cuestione. Pero aquí viene lo grave porque está amenazando con arrestar a legisladores que simplemente están cumpliendo con su deber constitucional. Lo que hicieron fue exigir supervisión en un centro de detención de agentes migratorios, y eso es parte del trabajo, señores. Sin embargo, Trump pues actúa como si tuviese una milicia personal, como si sus aliados fuesen intocables, como si pudieran manejar el sistema a su antojo. Esos agentes que menciona Jasmine Crockett, que se pasean con ropa civil y se comportan como si estuviesen por encima de la ley, son el reflejo del tipo de poder autoritario que Trump sueña con imponer. Y lo peor es que muchos de ellos ya están alineados con grupos extremistas. La línea entre estos agentes y, por ejemplo, los Proud Boys se está borrando cada vez más. Y aún así se sorprenden de que haya que ponerles un freno. Claro que debe de haber supervisión. Y el hecho de que Trump no quiera que exista esta fiscalización es exactamente la razón por la cual se necesita urgente que los demócratas alcen la voz. Pues bueno, amigos, pasemos no a otra noticia, sino que más a trasfondo de este proyecto de ley de gasto, ¿no? Donald Trump defendiendo a los trabajadores mientras impulsa recortes al Medicaid para dar regalos fiscales a los ricos. Suena tan absurdo como lógico en el universo de Trump. Amigos, hoy tenemos que hablar de esto que se está cocinando en Washington. Y aunque parezca lejano, afecta directamente a millones de personas. Donald Trump se ha reunido con legisladores republicanos para poder empujar este proyecto de ley que, entre otras cosas, es recortar programas sociales, como lo es el Medicaid, extender beneficios fiscales a los más ricos, seguro social, etc. Y claro, como siempre, lo vendió como una maravilla para la clase trabajadora. ¿Pero realmente es así? Vamos a ver un pedacito de este fragmento, lo vamos a analizar y volvemos. Escuchemos este clip.
Joining us now, NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans, NBC News chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles, and Punchbowl News co-founder and MSNBC political contributor Jake Sherman. So Ryan, bring us to the Hill today. What did Donald Trump get out of this meeting?
Well, it's clear, Katie, that he hoped that he was going to be able to close the deal today, that he was going to be able to walk into that room and look at the dispirited factions of the Republican caucus and tell them the time for fighting is over. Get out of your corners, come to the floor and vote yes. And while there is some signs that he may have moved the needle more in that direction, he has by no means closed the deal. There are a number of House Republicans, both on the conservative side of the ledger and those more moderate Republicans from blue states that are worried about the state and local tax deduction, who are still no votes and still want to see demonstrable changes in this bill before they're ready to vote yes. This despite Trump in that meeting specifically calling them out, specifically telling them that the time for grandstanding was over and that they all needed to come together and basically all give a little bit to get to a place where this bill could be passed and over the finish line. Now, what's interesting is the dynamic that you see playing out from these Republican members as they exited that meeting. They're not necessarily bucking Trump. They're not saying that Trump is not the reason that they're going to vote yes, but they're instead putting that responsibility on the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, to tweak the package in a way that can make them feel comfortable voting yes so that they can then do what Trump is asking them to do. So while Trump may have moved things in the right direction, it's by no means a done deal, and there's a lot of work that needs to happen between now and the deadline, the self-imposed deadline that the speakers put on them to get this done before the Memorial holiday. Katie.
Hey, Jake, how did Mike Lawler respond to being called out by name?
I don't think he's happy, and here's why he's probably not happy. Trump campaigned on getting rid of the SALT problem. He said it bluntly, Katie. There's no ambiguity at his rally in September, I believe it was, in Nassau Coliseum, a rally that I believe Nick LaLota, one of the SALT people, attended and was a big rally, you'll remember, Katie, back in the campaign season. I could write a book. I won't, but I could write a book on how this has been mishandled. The SALT issue was, Katie, from the beginning, one of the earliest issues brought up by a significant block of House Republicans. All the other things are more complex, dealing with the funding of Medicaid and equally important and equally charged and all those things. But if I were the leadership looking back at this, you could have built this entire bill with the idea that you would have to do something big on SALT, because they said it. On Trump, Katie, it just shows you, time and time again, that loyalty doesn't mean that much to him, from him, meaning the SALT, he wouldn't have a Republican House if it weren't for the SALT caucus, for the most part. And the HFC, excuse me, has been his most ardent defenders throughout everything. And on their two issues, he not only went against them, but publicly embarrassed them. And it's a little bit too early to know the immediate impact. I do think, though, that the SALT folks are going to dig in more, and we're watching in about, actually 5 minutes ago, there was supposed to be a meeting between Mike Johnson, and the SALT caucus. We'll have to see how that goes because, again, this bill is coming before the Rules Committee tonight or tomorrow morning at 1 a.m. They want to get this on the floor tomorrow. They're having some problems, actually, right now that I'm monitoring on the House floor, a provision that allows them to bring up a bill the same day it passes the Rules Committee. That they're losing that vote right now. So I'm going to go watch it in a minute. That would hamper their ability. But, you know, this is a gigantic bill, and there are still not dozens, but a half a dozen issues that are open. That is, you know, not unheard of, but very unusual.
Yeah, just to kind of go at this a little bit longer, I know that you say you're not quite sure how the Salters are going to react to this, but I wonder if there is a feeling in Congress that among Republicans that they can take a stand more. They have more leeway to hew to their beliefs, what they campaigned on, their own constituencies, not just Donald Trump. And is part of that because they see Trump perhaps weakening? Do they see Elon Musk going out there and saying he's not going to spend big on campaigns? Is this a moment where they feel like they have some runway?
They feel like they have agency for sure, but I want to just remind you, Katie, and I was thinking about this morning when I was texting with somebody who served on the Republican side in the first Trump administration. Trump has been very ineffective when trying to get people to vote for things when he does these visits to the Hill. I can think of 3 instances. The health care bill, which obviously did not go anywhere. And then we had a series of bills, immigration bills in the first Trump administration that were coined Goodlatte and Goodlatte 2, named after Bob Goodlatte, who was then the chair of the Judiciary Committee. I know this is in the weeds, but he came up here to sell one of those bills or both of those bills, and neither of them went anywhere. But yes, I do feel like because this is all in one bill, which Mike Johnson said needed to be the case, people feel like this is their only shot at getting things the way they want them to be, and they need to establish what they think is the strongest position going into the Senate. And that is why on SALT, a provision that could get watered down in the Senate, Medicaid, which will get watered down in the Senate, IRA, which will get changed in the Senate, they feel like they have to take their stand now.
Let's talk about Medicaid, Christine.
Sure.
There's a lot of Medicaid cuts in this bill.
Yep.
Donald Trump doesn't want them to touch Medicaid, apparently. If things stand and say the House Freedom Caucus gets their way, because, again, everything is still in flux, what does Medicaid look like after this bill?
Well, it plays into this narrative that this bill blows up the deficit further. It makes rich people richer, gives more money to people who have money and less to people who need something. And it fits into sort of that narrative. It would tighten eligibility. It would speed up. Right now in this bill, it's got work requirements for Medicaid starting in 2029. There are some hardliners who really want that to be earlier. They want cuts to these programs quickly. These food programs and the like. I mean, this is the worldview, you know, that this is not a nanny state that's just exploded over the past decade.
They believe it helps people.
Exactly.
Ok, señores, paremos ahí. Donald Trump dice que estos recortes al Medicaid no le van a quitar cobertura a nadie, ¿no? Que van a mejorar el sistema. Eso es como decir que puedes adelgazar comiendo donas. Suena lindo, pero no tiene ningún sustento. Primero, no hay un solo análisis independiente que pueda respaldar esta afirmación. De hecho, lo que hace este proyecto es imponer requisitos laborales mucho más estrictos para acceder al Medicaid. Yo les pregunto a ustedes, ¿a quién afecta esto? A la gente que más lo necesita. A quienes tienen empleos precarios. A quienes no pueden trabajar por tal vez condiciones médicas. O quienes cuidan a familiares. Hablamos de gente real, gente con vidas reales. Donald Trump vende esta idea de que los programas sociales son una muleta que impide que la gente trabaje. Pero creo que se le olvidó un poco de que la mayoría de los beneficiarios del Medicaid ya trabajan, o simplemente no pueden hacerlo por razones que sí son válidas. Entonces, ¿de qué está hablando? ¿Qué incluye este proyecto? Exenciones fiscales para ricos. Eliminación de impuestos a las propinas y a las horas extras. Medidas que suenan lindas y otra vez que benefician más al que ya tiene dinero. O sea, pues, menos para quienes dependen del Estado y más para los que evaden el Estado. Ahora sé que algunos dirán, bueno, pero Trump está intentando equilibrar el presupuesto. Pero amigos, eso es otra trampa. Estos recortes no reducen el déficit, lo aumentan. Al querer regalar ingresos fiscales a los más ricos, aumenta el déficit. Incluso hemos visto a senadores republicanos como Josh Hawley, que no es precisamente progresista, y lo ha dejado muy en claro. ¿Por qué recortar Medicaid a los trabajadores mientras se dan regalos a los ricos? Una buena pregunta, ¿no? Entonces, amigos, no. Al menos yo no me trago el cuento de que esto fortalece el Medicaid ni que Trump está defendiendo al trabajador. Lo que hace es usar a la clase media como un escudo para poder beneficiar a los de siempre. Y lo más preocupante es que muchos caen en ese discurso. ¿Por qué, amigos? Porque suena populista. Pero detrás de todo eso, simplemente hay desigualdad disfrazada de patriotismo fiscal. Pero bueno, ¿qué opinan ustedes? ¿Creen que estos recortes al Medicaid están justificados o que son una trampa disfrazada? ¿Ustedes piensan que Trump todavía representa los intereses de los trabajadores? Los invito a que me dejen sus opiniones en la caja de comentarios. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarme hasta el final de este video. Recuerda, como siempre, dale like, compártelo con tus amigos y suscríbete a nuestro canal Políticamente en Desacuerdo. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.